Hey everyone, it's been a few weeks since my last episode, but I promise this one is worth the wait. Today, I'm beyond excited to have Ash Butterss on the show, the incredible host of the Behind the Smile podcast. Ash was actually one of the very first podcasts I ever listened to when I started this journey, even before I made the decision to quit drinking myself. She's raw, honest, and inspiring, and in this episode, we dive into a little bit of everything. Her recovery from alcohol, bold career pivots, navigating relationships and marriage, family life, and the lessons she's learned along the way. Her story is real, uplifting, and by the end of our conversation, you'll not only feel inspired, you'll be a fan of Ash Butterss too. Hi, Ash. Welcome to the Alcohol-Free Rebellion.
Hi, Abby. How are you? I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm so thrilled you're here. I have to share with you, and we just caught up a little bit, but I didn't share this. I wanted to share this as we record. So one of the first podcasts I listened to on this journey, and even before I quit drinking, it was I was kind of dipping my toe in and seeing what this is all about. And then, whatever was your podcast, Behind the Smile.
Goodness, that actually makes my heart explode a little bit. That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. How amazing that we can be connected, on other sides of the world and have this, this beautiful thing that ties us together. I just love that. Thank you.
Yes. So you're a pivotal part. I mean, just even hearing your voice, it's like a pivotal part of my journey. And so it's just surreal to have you here. I'm so excited. So for anyone who might not be familiar with your story, can you give us a quick snapshot of your journey? What life looked like before and then what's changed since sobriety?
Yes, absolutely. My goodness. What has changed? The simple answer to that is absolutely everything, but I can share a little more about that a little later on. I do agree. I like to always share what it looked like beforehand, because I think one of the really important things, I'm sure that a lot of your listeners are perhaps sober curious or they're already on some sort of sobriety journey. And I know for me in the very beginning, what I sought and sought out most was identification, to be able to hear my story in others, because I think that alcohol addiction, alcoholism, whatever you want to call it, I think that there is so much shame and stigma still attached to those different labels that I know for me, I was 32 when I got sober, and I did not think that I was an alcoholic. I knew that I had a problematic relationship with alcohol because once I started, I couldn't stop. Towards the end of my drinking, I was on this, I call it the hamster wheel, where I would wake up every day promising myself, swearing that I wouldn't drink again that day because I was so violently hungover and full of guilt, shame, and remorse from whatever I'd done the night before, which usually consisted of getting on my phone and messaging and calling anyone who would listen, basically. And then I'd see that 30-minute call log and think to myself, I don't remember a single word that I said to that person. So you can just imagine that hideous feeling that I would wake up with almost every single day. And then I would tell myself that I wasn't going to drink that day. And then by about 4 or 5 o'clock, whenever I could justify that it was an acceptable time to start drinking, I would. And my end stage alcoholism, I do identify as an alcoholic, but take it or leave it if that's not the right word for you. My end stage was such that if I started drinking, I had to pass out to stop. There was no off switch and there was no rational thought inside my mind where I would say, it's 9 p.m. I better put the cork back in the bottle, or, whatever it was that I was drinking at the time. For me, it was vodka in the end because it was fast and it was effective and it would get me drunk a lot more than wine. Anyhow, I didn't have that ability to switch off. So I was passing out every night and it was just unbearable. Yet on the outside looking in, everything seemed okay. I mean, yes, I had put on about 15 kilos over the period of 2.5 years. I was puffy, I was red, but I still had my marriage. I still owned my home. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, flying all around the world. It looked good. From the outside looking in, it looked good, but I knew I wasn't good. I knew that I was getting to a point where I felt completely hopeless. I couldn't live with alcohol and I couldn't live without it. And so I really didn't know what to do. And so going back to that point of identification, and part of the reason I started my podcast Behind the Smile was after I came out of rehab, I went into 12-step communities. And that's really where I've spent the majority of my sobriety, within 12-step community. But until I walked through those doors, I didn't think that anyone else had my problem that looked like me, sounded like me. Like, I just couldn't find her. It's changed a lot in the last 5.5 years. The sobriety movement has absolutely boomed, and I think that's fantastic. Like we were sharing before we started recording, I love that I really believe that there's enough space for all of us. And I think that it's unlike other industries. I think that for the most part, we're all really supportive of one another, because for many of us, this is life and death. And so it's like, come jump on the life raft. There's plenty of room. Like, let's do this together. Let's support each other. I'm going to share with you how I got sober. You can share it with me. And hopefully through even this conversation today, there's somebody listening who can pick up one or two things where they think to themselves, oh my goodness, that's me. And therefore, if I identify with these women and they can show that it's possible, then maybe it's possible for me too. So yeah, that's really my mission, is to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction, because I think they kind of all go hand in hand to a degree. We're often drinking more than we want to because we're trying to soothe in some way. And of course, alcohol is an addictive substance. So what happens when you take an addictive substance every day? You become addicted to it. It's not a moral failing. It's simply that alcohol has done what it's designed to do in that instance. And for me, yeah, it was full-blown addiction by that end.
I know. And it's so relatable. And it's easy to kind of make these justifications for what's going on. Like when you said you drank to the point of passing out, that's what I was doing too. But I had ways of saying, I don't have an off switch, or I just don't know when to stop. You just have these ways of explaining it away. But when you
Mm-hmm.
take that all away and explain what it is, I didn't have that. Like, I truly didn't. There was no part where my brain was like, that's enough. Like, I would look at people that were like, I'm going to go home now. And I'd be like, what? Like, my brain didn't even do that. Or my husband would be like, I'm hungry. I'm tired. And I'm like, it was just like more constantly. And so
Yes.
I'm
And
sure a lot of people can relate to that.
yeah. And it blew my mind, Abby. I had no idea until I got sober that the physiological reaction that I have to alcohol is actually unique. It is not something that every person experiences. I believe, and some people may or may not agree with this, I believe that it's genetic, even though they haven't found the alcoholism gene in itself. I come from a family line of alcoholics, and I believe I've been drinking alcoholically from the very first drink, because what happens when I take a drink is it sets off this phenomenon of craving. Like, I have one, and then all of a sudden something switches in my brain, and it's like all I can think about, all I'm focused on is where I'm getting that next drink. And I thought that happened to everyone. Like, I thought that was just what alcohol did. Turns out, no. Some people can have one or two drinks and then go, okay, that was nice. I think I've had enough. I'm like, what?
Oh, never.
I still
Never.
will be sitting at dinner with a bunch of my girlfriends who are all normies, and I'll watch them drink wine, and I'm thinking to myself, why aren't you drinking that faster? What are you doing? Like, it's the mental obsession is literally still there. Not that I want to have a drink anymore. I'm so grateful that the desire to drink has been completely removed from my life, but I still obsess over alcohol, and especially when I'm looking at other people and how they relate to it, because I just don't get it.
Well, it's just so fascinating. And I think we spent so much time being like, why am I like this? And with all the success that you've had, it's like you've clearly been able to figure out a lot of stuff.
Mm.
Surely you can figure out alcohol, right? And so you're just on this constant, but as soon as you start drinking, it's out of your hands. So there's no controlling, there's no working through it, because it's like the alcohol takes over. It does something to your brain. I mean, it's funny you say like studies or the genes, because my husband lovingly and jokingly would say, you should be studied because a lot of people start drinking and they get sleepy, and you turn into this like dance machine who like can't
Yes.
stop and just want to keep going, and you have so much energy. I would be like, until the bar wants to like throw me out because they're closing, I will stay.
Yep.
and people would be like dropping like flies. They're like, well, I'm kind of hungry, or I'm going to go home, or I just want to like watch the show I'm into. And I'm like, what? Like, alcohol was the show for me. And it's
1000%.
fascinating how that, and I agree, because I also came from a long line of alcoholics, and it's just kind of, there's obviously a through line there, and it's identifying and just being honest with yourself of like, okay, clearly this is, but I didn't have role models or other people out there talking about it, right? Like there is now, which is so helpful to be like, oh, that's what's
Mm.
going on here, right?
Yeah. And it's so crazy. When I was in sort of 2018 to I got sober at the very start of 2020. And in those last couple of years, even probably the 5 years leading up to that, I remember there was a couple of times where I had sufficiently burnt my life to the ground. I'd either had a big breakup or, I'd gone out on a night and really damaged a friendship or something. And I would call my dad, because he was in 12-step recovery. He was about 10 years sober at that time. And every now and then he would say, well, sweetheart, are you ready? And I would say, oh, I think so. I don't know. And he'd take me to a meeting, and I didn't hear anything. I was so consumed with self. I was so riddled with shame. It was almost like I had cotton wool in my ears. And I would leave that meeting and think to myself, I'm not like those people. And so I'd go back out and I would be drinking again that evening. But even the reason I'm sharing that story, Abby, is because even having my dad in 12-step recovery, seeing the evidence of alcoholism, the destruction it causes, and then the solution that is available for people like us, I still didn't think that that was me. It's
I
crazy, the
know.
denial, like you said, and the justification that our brains will run through our mind to keep us drinking, to keep us stuck in that cycle.
I know. And I saw, so it was my mom, and she didn't go through treatment. She's still in this thing, and it's been terrible. So the last thing, literally the last thing that I would have done, because I hated alcohol. I was like, this is like taking my mom. It's ruined everything, whatever.
Mm,
But the justification was like, well, this is different than what she's doing. In college, I'm with my friends, I'm out, I'm like drinking beer or whatever. This is different than her drinking wine at home, right? And then
mm.
it was, oh, I'm in New York City. I'm spending $24 on these drinks. This is different, right?
Yeah,
Like there's all these different ways of like your mind. And then eventually gets to the point where it's like, this isn't different. This is
mm,
literally the same thing. And I have to face
exactly.
this. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Absolutely. It's the hardest thing and yet the most rewarding, right?
Yes, it is. It's like completely changed my life. So let's talk about
Mm.
these shifts.
Yes.
So I feel like we go through these identity shifts, and once alcohol got out of the picture, like how did that change? Did that change career? Did that change your personal life? Like talk about how that, made some changes, I assume.
Yeah. Like I said, every single area of my life has changed. And look, if I had known that in the beginning, I may not have gone through with this, because the last 5 years, particularly the first two, were arguably the hardest 2 years of my life. But the life that I have now on the other side of moving through that journey is truly, and this is a cliche, but I have to say it is truly a life beyond my wildest dreams. It is more than I ever thought was possible. And at the same time, if you had asked me what I wanted 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have asked for this life, because I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what was possible. So yeah, basically I went into treatment at the start of 2020. I went to a rehab in Sydney, Australia. And I was in that rehab for 3 weeks. And that's really where I first identified as being an alcoholic. I really started to understand what that meant, because prior to going in, I had thought that an alcoholic was somebody who drank out of a brown paper bag and lived under a bridge, even though my dad was neither of those things. That's still what I thought. So I didn't think that I was, and therefore I didn't think that the solution that was being put on the table was applicable to me. And that was all changed in rehab. Part of the being removed from alcohol was really important for me, Abby, as well. Because, like I said, I couldn't stop. I had tried to moderate. I had tried to quit completely so many times, I can't even tell you. So once I didn't have the option, I suppose I could have walked out the doors, but by that stage, I was sufficiently broken enough to just say, I had put my hands up at that point and just said, I'll do whatever it takes. And so I remember identifying as an alcoholic and then seeing that there was a solution, and starting to see other women in particular who also was standing up in these rooms and saying, I'm an alcoholic and I'm 5 years sober and I love my life. And I could see it. They had clear skin, big bright eyes. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, maybe there's a life in sobriety that is one that I could actually love and enjoy. Because that was the other thing. By the time I was, I suppose, on my hands and knees saying, I need to give up, I need to stop drinking, I was also accepting of the fact that that might mean of living a life of misery. Like I had honestly believed that sobriety was going to be this miserable existence. I was going to have no friends. I was going to be bored because I was such a party girl. And I was willing to take that because the other option was probably either a long, slow death or a death that was going to come quicker than I wanted. And so I thought to myself, well, I'll take this other option. I'll walk through the other door, but it doesn't look like it's good. It was pretty bleak from my outlook. Well, seeing those women there, I thought to myself, maybe I've got this wrong. And from that, moving through the process of doing the inner child healing, the rehab that I went to was actually modeled off the Meadows in Arizona. And so they use a lot of Pia Melody's work, and I was codependency was explained to me. I understood just how severe my perfectionism was. In fact, a therapist once said to me during those 3 weeks, Ash, your perfectionism will kill you before the alcohol does. And that I remember that was like really hit home. And so I was given the opportunity to look at all of these different areas of my life. When I came out of rehab, the world went into lockdown. So that was really bizarre because I wasn't able to get myself to any 12-step recovery meetings. I was doing them online, but I really missed connection in those first 12 months. I was actually isolated, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bondi Beach with my husband at the time who was still using. So I couldn't leave, and his using was my number one trigger. So it was almost like, I call my higher power God, but whatever it is for you, if you have one, and I was like, wow, God, you're really challenging me here. It was almost like, how bad do you want this? And I look back at that time now, I'm so proud of that version of me for not giving in. But I also know that if I could have survived that first 12 months, I really can survive anything. And that's why I say that first 2 years was really hard. Now, they say not to make any big changes in your first 12 months of sobriety. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them being that you're still developing emotional sobriety. So your ability to have resilience and to handle life on life's terms, that is something that is established and continues to grow. Well, that's been my experience anyway. And so in the first 12 months, it's important not to make any big disruptions to your life because that might be a big enough trigger for you to pick up a drink and go, this is all too hard. Even though, so for instance, one of the things I had realized at about the 6-month mark was that my marriage was not going to last. But I had this voice inside my head going, you can't make any big decisions in your first 12 months. And I took it all so literally. So I figured out a way to nurture, to build that self-trust, just to lean into my recovery program. And I stayed and I didn't pick up a drink. And it was hard. It was the hardest year of my life. But then I reached that 12-month mark. Oh, and the second reason is because this is for me anyway. I didn't know who I was. I had been drinking from the age of 12. And so from 12 to 32, that's 20 years of alcoholic drinking. Of course, it progressed and got worse in the later years, but I had always drunk alcoholically. And they say that you stop developing emotionally when you start drinking, essentially. So I had the EQ of a 12-year-old. So I needed to first establish that EQ, but then I also had to figure out who Ash was. What did I like? I mean, I didn't even know what my favorite color was, Abby. I was so disconnected from who I really am, wearing the masks, being the chameleon. And so in that 12 months, I started to figure out who I was. To be honest, it's actually been a journey over the last 5 years, but it started in that first 12 months. And so again, if I had made big decisions in my first 12 months based on that version of me, then I believe that I would have made decisions that could, of course, put my life on a path that was not the one I was meant to be on. And so really what that first 12 months was learning how to take my hands off the steering wheel, because I'd been viciously, aggressively trying to steer my life for 32 years and I hadn't done a great job. It had gotten me through the doors of a rehab. So really learning to take my hands off the wheel and just allow life to happen and to say, okay, where do you want me? I pray, and I would pray to God or my higher power, and I'd be like, how can I be of service? How can I show up? Where do you want me? Which was so different to how I'd lived the first 32 years of my life. So I got to that 12-month mark and I was like, right, I've done the 12 months. I haven't made any changes. I now know deeply what I need to do. And so what I did was I left my marriage, which was incredibly painful and difficult. Then I moved from Sydney back to Melbourne, which is about an hour flight from Sydney, but I'd been living in Sydney for 8 years. So I came back to Melbourne, which was my home base. And that was really confronting as well, because when I had left Melbourne in 2014, I had sufficiently burnt my life to the ground. I had really gone out with a bang. And so there was a lot of shame about returning to my hometown, but it was the place I needed to be. And from there, I really started to do the work. And I threw myself even deeper into recovery at this stage. 2021, we had started to open up a little bit. Mind you, Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world. So it was kind of like we'd be open and closed, open and closed. But I was making connections. I was meeting other sober people. I was really focusing on me. I also moved into a 2-bedroom apartment by myself with my little dog Frank, and that's the first time I'd ever lived alone. So there was so much growing, healing, and crying in that year. That year, that 1 to 2 year of sobriety. My goodness, it was painful. So much crying, and I'd always really, I had been really proud of the fact that I was not a girl who cried. That was the version of me when I was in my drinking. I saw it as a sign of weakness, and now I know so to be true that you must feel it to heal it. And so if I can feel tears coming on, I'm like, great, this is awesome. We're moving through something here. Bring it on, bring it on. Exactly right. And so really it was in that second year of my sobriety that I started to get some downloads around what I wanted to spend my life working towards. And as I mentioned, I had been working for a Fortune 500 company. It was my absolute dream job. Up until that point, it was the dream job of the version of me who was seeking external validation and all that kind of stuff. And I realized that it was no longer in alignment with the person I wanted to be and where I felt I was being led. And so I started to put some pieces in place. I went and I did my yoga teacher training, my 200 hours there. I started to explore deeper aspects of my spirituality. And then I came to a decision around that 2-year mark where I decided to leave my job, the security of my full-time job. I started my podcast, which had the mission to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. I became a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher. Then I went on to become a breathwork facilitator and a coach. And all of a sudden, I had built this life which didn't feel like something that I was doing. I can't really explain it. I felt like I was in that flow state where it was just happening and it was where I was meant to be. Like I said, if you'd asked me when I was 3 months sober, what are you going to be doing in 4 years from now? I just couldn't have pictured this because I just didn't even know it was possible. And then some other really...
You wouldn't even have known what breath work was, right? You would have been like, wait,
exactly right. Yes, my entire world just cracked open. And just to get a little bit more current, I had separated from my husband. I spent that year alone in deep introspection. And then about a year after that, I ended up meeting someone who was also sober and we fell in love. A couple of months ago, I flew to Europe and we eloped. And it was just the most incredible time of my life. I know. And again, I just pinched myself because I think, there's just no way I could have envisioned any of this. And yet it is truly a life beyond my wildest dreams. I've never been happier. I've never been more content. But yeah, I had to walk through the fire to get here. That's for sure.
It's so amazing and so inspirational. I mean, I'm in that year, I'm approaching year 2. And so I see so much of myself in this story. The same thing, built this whole life, talk about your hands on that wheel, just I'm going to make all this stuff happen. And you're doing really impressive stuff on paper.
Yeah.
But inside, it doesn't feel aligned. There are parts of it, don't get me wrong, that I'll always cherish and people that I met and experiences and all of that. But it wasn't aligned. And there was a reason it felt so uncomfortable and just not aligned, not fulfilled. And the drinking was masking a lot of that. And that's how I got my happiness.
Yes.
was through the drinking. It just allowed me to let go and all of this stuff. Part of me was like, there has to be a better way and whatever. So then you go through all of this, but it's really jumping into the unknown, right? And with sobriety or with leaving the job that you worked, and it's just like, well, you start to just have to trust yourself and trust your intuition and trust the universe and trust that this is going to work out. You keep pushing forward, putting yourself out there, and things are going to come together in a way that you couldn't even imagine. And that
Mm-hmm.
is why you're not supposed to hold on to the steering wheel so hard, because you have no idea where you're actually going. Right?
Yes, yes, you're going to steer yourself off a cliff like I did.
But it's
Yes.
so hard to know. And there's so much fear with that. And
Mm.
how it's, how we're conditioned, and everything is to just like go and apply for this and push, when a lot of it is letting go and stepping back. And so it's kind of this push pull of trusting yourself enough to do that, but everything in time. Like, first, I feel like you have to heal from everything that you've done to your body from the alcohol
Mm.
and everything like that, and then get through, like you were mentioning, that first year. And then it's like, okay, I need to start to make some changes. And then it was like the job. So those big pivotal moments, like leaving the
Mm.
job, or, like, what was that like? Like, when you quit, like, did you feel like you were doing the right thing? Were you nervous? Were you like, talk me through that?
This is actually a funny story. So, when I decided to quit my full-time, well-paying job, and keep in mind, I was living alone at the time. I didn't have anybody else paying my bills or anything like that. I remember thinking to myself at the time, I was actually going to go and study my master's in psychology. So, my undergrad is in journalism communication, and I have always been interested in psychology. And then through my own personal experience of the transformation, going into treatment, working with a team, and particularly my psychotherapist, who I formed a very close relationship with. I was seeing her, I met her inside the walls of that rehab. And then I was seeing her on a weekly basis for probably the first 6 months. And then after that, from 6 to 12 months, it was fortnightly. And then it dropped back to a monthly kind of thing. And she was a pivotal part of this transformation for me. And I really wanted to be able to share that and do that work. And so I decided, I was really tossing up, do I do psychotherapy? Do I do psychology? And I have to be so honest with you, Abby, because this is such an important lesson that I hope I'll prevent other people from making the mistake. I let my ego make the decision. And what that turned out to be was I decided to go for psychology because it, on paper is considered the more prestigious degree. And I had gotten accepted into Melbourne Uni, which is one of the most prestigious universities. So, the ego self was like, well, this is fantastic because now I'm doing my master's of psychology at Melbourne Uni, tick, tick, tick. Everything looks, again, back to the old patterns and behaviors, everything looks good on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started my degree and I left the job, and by this stage I had I was yoga teaching, so I was able to still earn income, and I had savings, so I knew that I had this buffer where I could go and do my master's. I was about 4 weeks into this degree, and it had been entirely science up until this point. We were doing transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. It was physics, it was mathematics. Now, I despised those subjects at school. Give me English, history, drama any day of the week. But maths, I still have nightmares about my year 12 maths exams. Like, I just hated. And I was sitting in this lecture hall, and it was almost like they were talking another language, Chinese, Spanish. I was just like, nothing was going in. And I remember going up to one of the teachers after a class that was after a tutorial. And I said, excuse me, I'm just wondering, like, when do we get to the part where we talk about feelings? And she looked at me and she said, oh, I'm so sorry. You're in the wrong degree. Like, that's not what we do here. A master's of psychology is a science degree. And in
Wow, I
that
didn't know that.
moment, yes, right? And in that moment, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what have I done? I'd made a decision. I hadn't paused. I hadn't done enough introspection. I'd allowed my ego to make a decision. And so then I was faced with this turning point where I thought to myself, well, do I suck it up and continue doing a degree that doesn't feel in alignment with my heart and soul? because I've left my job telling everyone I'm off to do my master's and I'm going to become this, incredible psychologist? Or do I just, do I leave now and go back and take this learning? Mind you as well, I'd missed the census date in Australia, which is like the cutoff for you to be able to get to not pay for the degree. So I ended up having to pay like 18,000 Australian dollars.
Stop.
It was wild. Anyway, it was an expensive and painful learning, but I'm so glad that I did, because what that then allowed me to do was really come back to self. I ended up deciding not to go back and do that kind of study. I really then focused in on, well, what do I want to be doing? I want to be sharing my message. And then sure enough, later that year, I was invited to do a TED Talk, and I started to really expand the speaking side of things and then helping others in the coaching space. And again, when I took my hands off the wheel, I ended up being exactly where I needed to be. So it was very
that is
painful.
so relatable, by the way. It's just like, because you want it to make sense. You're like, I want this story to make sense. So if I'm leaving this career, it's to go get this prestigious degree at this prestigious university, and then I'm going to have this prestigious job, and then it's going to make sense to everybody. It's like, great. Does it make sense to you? Is that what you want to do? And you're like, oh,
Exactly.
no, it doesn't. And you're like, why
No.
are you doing it then? And it's,
I
as
know.
someone posted something, it's like being on a train that's going in the wrong direction. It's pretty expensive to get back, right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
yes,
really
I love that.
taking the time. I know, which I think
Mm.
everybody can relate to. But yeah, that's painful, but also kind of funny that you're like, what are the feelings part of this? Like,
I was
that's
like,
what
I
I'm
just
here
want to
for.
talk. Yeah, I just want to talk about people's feelings. Like, let's do some inner child healing. And she's like, oh no, sweetie, not this degree.
Gosh, I know. It's so crazy. But yeah, it really is. So it's this journey back. And so it's letting go and getting in touch with, when you say 12, oh my gosh, like I think mine was around, I say like 18 or so, really, when I started like heavily drinking. And it was the same exact thing. I felt like I was 18 again in early sobriety, learning. I didn't understand how to like feel through things, work through things, the emotions, the everything. And so it's like, from that point on, there were so many decisions that were made, whether it's career, around your life, or around your friends, that weren't really, those decisions weren't made by me. It was kind of this like masked, messy, foggy version of just kind of like making decisions based on like what I should be doing or what would be impressive to people. And so it's a weird place to be sitting, like leaving that behind. I'm in this limbo transition and deciding what this next phase is going to look like. And it can be really scary, but it helps to hear from someone that's a few steps ahead of me of it working out. And it's nothing that you can even necessarily predict necessarily. It's things that are going to come together and opportunities that come your way, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to mention that I haven't made these mistakes and then just sort of sat there and said, okay, well, what's next? Like, I've taken a lot of action around my spiritual life, and I wasn't a spiritual person or a religious person before getting sober. I'd gone to an Anglican girls' school, and I'd sat in churches because I was in the choir and I loved to sing, but I didn't have a faith or a practice around that. And that's something that I started doing very early on in my sobriety journey. And what that looks like for me is a mixture of prayer and meditation. Because I often find that when I'm praying, I'm talking to my higher power. And when I'm meditating, I'm listening. I'm waiting for the answers to drop in. And without that as a foundation for me, I think I would have continued to be led by my head. I would have continued to try and figure it out the same way I tried to figure out alcohol for so long. I thought it was a lack of willpower. I thought it was a moral failing. And so there was that idea, well, if I just try harder, then, I'll figure it out. But that hasn't been the case in my drinking, and it hasn't been the case in my sobriety. All I have to do is take the action to continue forming a relationship with something greater than myself so that I can be open to the possibilities and be guided. And that's really hard for someone like me who is a type A control freak, perfectionist. Trust me. But if I can do it, you can too. And it doesn't have to be religious. It's spiritual. Like, for me, it truly is. And that's why I think I was so drawn to yoga as well, because yoga is such a spiritual practice. It's a moving meditation. It's something that brings me back to myself on a daily basis. I spent 32 years running away from myself and trying to do anything I could to numb and disconnect from, the version of me that lives right there inside my heart. And now I have a life that is so focused on anything I can do to connect back in with myself. Like, it's the complete opposite. So it's important to know that there is action required around this stuff. Like, it doesn't just happen because you get sober.
That's such a good point. Absolutely.
Mm.
And the spiritual journey has been something I've embarked on really in the past couple months, but it's been
Yay.
completely life changing. And so it's my morning pages every day from the
Yes.
Artist's Way and
The
meditation
best.
every day. And so, like, the Untethered Soul was one that
Mm.
like changed my life.
Michael
What would
Singer
you
is
say are
incredible.
Oh my gosh, incredible, incredible. And I listened to, so anyway, and I go down the whole rabbit hole of all his books. If you had to point to, if someone's listening to this and they're like, I want to go on a spiritual journey, like where would you recommend they start?
If you were just to do one thing to begin, I would say meditation is the place to start. And there are so many great free apps now. Insight Timer is amazing. I've got plenty of free meditations on there. If you want to go on there and just type in Ash Butterss, you can listen along to those. I find that what meditation has done for me is it has taught me how to settle the chatter and to settle the mind. Because part of the reason I drank the way I did was from as early as I can remember, I have had the most vicious inner critic. This voice inside my head that is constantly telling me I'm unworthy and I'm not good enough, my two biggest negative core beliefs. And what alcohol did at that age of 12 was it almost turned the volume dial down. And for that moment that I was inebriated, there was peace inside my mind. So, of course, I wanted to have that experience more and more and more. And so, when I've removed alcohol from my life, unfortunately, guess what happens? Those inner critic voices, the dial just got turned back up again. And so then I was like, well, what am I going to do now? Because I can't have alcohol. That's no longer a solution for me. Meditation has been the tool, one of the tools, but probably the most profound tool that has taught me how I myself can turn the dial down without needing a substance, whether that's alcohol, food, my phone. I don't need to reach for those external things anymore to quieten my mind and to feel safe within my own body, my own vessel. And I know that meditation can be really difficult for people, especially if you've got an overactive mind, if your head is really noisy, if that inner critic is really loud. And so what I often say is, don't start with a 10-minute guided meditation. If that's where you're at, just start with even some mindfulness practices. Like, one thing that I love to do and I love to encourage people to try is in the morning or in the evening, whenever you take your shower, just commit to mindfulness for those 3 to 5 minutes. So what that looks like is stepping into the shower and being really conscious and aware of the feeling and the sensation of the water as it hits your skin, travels down your arms, and then runs down off your body into the drain. Notice the smells in the shower if you're lathering yourself with soap. Notice the sounds, the smells, the textures. It's just a mindfulness-based practice that can take 3 to 5 minutes, and then you're done. That's a beautiful way that you can enter into this space, and it doesn't require you to pick up your phone or pay anything. It's something you can do straight away. Mindfulness is a muscle. Our brain, I imagine that it's like a muscle, just like a bicep. So if you're doing daily reps, practicing mindfulness consistently, your capacity to sit in stillness will expand. You'll be able to hold more. And so for me now, practicing Vedic meditation, which is 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon, that is just like this beautiful, delicious, expansive, yummy space that I can sit in and I can really be with myself. But if you'd asked me to do that in my first 12 months, absolutely no way was I ready for it. So I just want to encourage people to just start. Consistency is key. Start small and your practice will grow over time. But that has without a doubt been a game changer for me.
I love that. And likewise here. I mean, I couldn't even sit with myself for a second. I was always fidgeting and looking for something else. And I couldn't be with my thoughts. I always had racing thoughts, so much anxiety, so much. And now I can sit and meditate. I look forward to it. It's now turned into just a ritual. Like I don't even think about it. I get my coffee, I do my morning pages, I meditate. It's all in
Beautiful.
a thing. I don't even think about it now. And it's changed how I see everything. It changes how I see this room, how I see what I'm doing right now. It's like a whole different world opens up. And it was all just by giving it a chance, like you said, and starting small, not diving in too much, because then you'll be like, I can't do this, right?
Yeah, and there's such a misconception that you can be good or bad at meditating. There's no such thing. Just commit to the practice for whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you're doing on a daily basis. It doesn't matter if you sit there and for the entire 10 minutes your mind is racing with thoughts. That's okay. In fact, that's positive. That's just your mind digesting whatever it needs to process in that time. And then when you get off the couch or the cushion or the mat or wherever you're meditating, you've processed and digested those thoughts. So now they're no longer racing around your mind when you go and face the day. You have more clarity. Hopefully you have a little bit more peace. And the other thing that it's really helped me to do is practice the pause, because I was somebody who was so reactive to life. I would say things, do things without even taking a beat to think about what I was saying, the impact it would have, the consequence that it might have. Whereas now I can pause. I can truly take, sometimes I'll say to someone, I need to get back to you. Like that was such a foreign concept to me 5 years ago. What do you mean?
Just talking to my friend about this at breakfast the other day. Like
Yeah,
both of us were saying, we didn't know that was an option. Like you don't have
exactly.
to react. And I'm like that's a big thing we've both learned in sobriety is and how that feels. You just feel so powerful in the fact that it's like I need to think about this. It's like, oh my gosh, game changer.
It is. It is so empowering and it's so honoring of self. And when we do those tiny micro actions on a daily basis, we're rebuilding self-trust and self-esteem, which for so many of us who embark on this journey of sobriety, we've lost that completely because alcohol is soul destroying and it takes away that self-esteem.
I know. This is so incredible. All right. I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to close out. By this point, people are like, how do I work with her? So if somebody wants to work with you, find out more, find your podcast, where do they find you? How can they work with you? What are some of the options?
Yeah. So if you want to reach out, then please, I'd love to hear from you if something's resonated from our conversation today. The easiest place to track me down is Instagram. So I'm at Ash Butterss on Instagram, and that's where I share all of the podcast clips as well. So you can check that out there. Otherwise, there is my website, www.ashbutterss with 2 S's on the end. .com. So either of those places is where you'll be able to connect with me. And yeah, I'd love to chat.
Amazing. And I'm going to have all of this in the show notes so everybody can head right there. Check out Ash, follow her, and go to her website. You can read her story there too, which is amazing. Ash, thank you so much for being here.
Abby,
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I've absolutely loved chatting with you, and I'm so excited to invite you onto Behind the Smile, which we're doing in a couple of weeks' time. So can't wait to chat again then.
Can't wait. Yes, that sounds great. Awesome. Talk to you soon.
Bye, Abby.
Bye.